Evcol.
Bride by Emma Dawson.
Dear Hugo, I'm writing to you because you ignore my calls, emails, and even Twitter messages. And you also persist in pretending not to be in when I go round to your flat. Just one little word of advice. In future, when unwelcome guests come by, you need to avoid turning off the lights the moment they ring the doorbell. It undermines your charade quite a lot. Firstly, and let's get it out of the way, I'm extremely sorry that I threw the goldfinch at your head when you proposed to me 2 Wednesdays ago. It was just what I happened to have in my hand. And it was, indeed, very unfortunate that it was the hardback edition. I now regret my enthusiasm in purchasing it on the day that it came out, because if it had been the paperback, then your nose would have fared better. And, of course, if you hadn't turned around at the wrong moment. But I'm avoiding the issue, I know. I genuinely admit it, so here it goes. I threw the book because I was utterly discombobulated by what you had just said to me. Because I had no idea that something as banal as marriage was even on your mind. Hugo, I haven't told you that I was married before. It was, well, how would you put it? A fucking nightmare of titanic proportions. Yes. I could have shuttled out novel after novel after novel about how much of a mistake it was, but I like pretending that it never happened. A shame, because I could have made millions. There's nothing the British public loves more than a barely fictionalized novel about a vicious marriage and a nasty divorce. The point is that I want to be with you, Hugo, but I will not tie strings with anyone. Been there, done that, as they say. Now I know better. And I'm sure that if you had been married, then you would know better too. And now, since some explanation is necessary, let me tell you about my marriage, so you can see why I'd rather do breaststroke through a serpent-infested swamp, or indeed remain single, than walk down the aisle again. I am willing to remember it for you. It started, predictably, with a proposal. Contact me if you want me to go on. With love, Toodle. Dear Hugo, before I continue with this story, I want to say that though I know that I overreacted when I threw the goldfinch at your head, really, what is an overreaction anyway? Who can say who acted proportionately or not? I mean, isn't it all simply a matter of individual perception? I just wish you hadn't reacted by storming out, that's all. But anyway, in 1993, I received a proposal, which I know you've been so excited to hear about because you wrote me tons of letters begging for the dirt. Oh wait, you didn't. But I'm going to tell you regardless. The proposal was the biggest display ever seen in the town of Latchtree, I'm told, until 2008, when some cocky bastard into synchronized swimming got his team to arrange themselves into say yes before he went down on one knee and in doing so knocked me off my perch. His team must have been enormous. But anyway, my husband drove up to my father's front door on November the 18th, 1973. He'd recently quit being an actor, so he regaled me with my girl before getting down on one knee, and the various people in his train waved lanterns in time to the music. To have said no would be unthinkable. Would have been embarrassing. But I didn't want to say no. I was crying before the first chorus, saying yes before his knee hit the ground. God, I was a bloody little fool. We were married only 2 months later at his request. We'd been dating for 6 months. I even took his name. I was looking at my wedding photos recently, you know, and I'm not in touch with almost any of the friends that I invited to attend. Isn't that ridiculous? And sad. Anyway, I wore this gorgeous lacy strapless number, but his interfering mother made me buy one of those boleros to put over it for the ceremony out of respect. I enjoyed stripping it off slowly as I entered my reception. But otherwise, it was a shit show. The overpriced wedding cake got dropped. They tried to salvage it, but nobody really wanted remains of cake. And my husband's Aunt Lena got drunker than a skunk and knocked over a whole table of glassware, and the dance floor was cleared for 55 minutes while the shards were safely removed. To top it all off, my husband got drunker than Aunt Lena and was unable to perform on the wedding night. I say that delicately, on purpose. And I had actually looked forward to my wedding. But even the bits that weren't a catastrophic disaster were somewhat mediocre. I kept thinking, is this it? I was so utterly disappointed with life at that moment when my husband fell easily asleep. He conked out practically in the middle of me hissing, "You promised me that you wouldn't get blotto," and immediately started snoring as loud as a herd of hippopotamuses, and I lay awake for hours, wanting to push my pillow very, very, very hard against his blissful fucking face. Cliffhanger. Did I commit murder? Is that what I mean when I say that weddings are a sensitive topic? You can find out if you write to me. With love, Doodle. Hugo, no word from you still. Oh, I'm truly offended. I thought you might actually be enjoying this story. Let's see if I can reel you in. But first things first, as I really do hope you've guessed, I did refrain from murdering my husband on our wedding night, because it was a bit of a cliché, you know. So he lived, and now I'll do the bit where we were happy, for honesty's sake. I liked that my husband wouldn't let go of my hand in public, so he took up the entire pavement all of the time. I liked that he was romantic, because all my girlfriends ever said to me was that their husbands wouldn't know romance if it bit them on the backside. He once put rose petals all over the house for Valentine's Day, which turned out to be a bit of a pain to clean up later, but I thought the gist was very sweet at the time. It was actually quite pleasant initially to have someone. A shock, but it meant that you never had to address your thoughts to the fridge, Shirley Valentine style. And I think we were both fascinated by the newness of it all. It was fresh and intriguing and, well, already a little bit too much. He was charming, attractive, and he could actually dance. Heck, he could sing. But we didn't have a thing in common. I remember suddenly realizing this while I was in the middle of editing a chapter about a bickering married couple, where the wife wanted the husband to take up tango classes with her, and the husband absolutely would not, and she'd eventually withdrawn sex, and he still wouldn't go to a single damn dancing class, and then I realised, oh shit, I've written an entire book about my own relationship and not noticed a thing. This is bad. Very bad. I don't really remember what that first novel was actually about. I do remember that the lead was called Josephina, though. Do I get points for that? Nobody would publish it. He enjoyed the theatre, late-night drinking sessions and seedy clubs, and imagining that he could have been a famous actor. I've always liked activities that involve staying at home, Hugo, so my husband and I could never agree on how to spend our time. He thought my scribblings were beneath him, and too often we ran out of conversation entirely. And those were the better times, because we actually argued more than we conversed in that last year, fighting over a male editor who I'd audaciously met for a coffee, or why I needed to work on my novel again, or whether he drank too much last night, or why I was always such a cunt all the time. We used to throw things at each other when we really got going. I'll tell you what in the next letter, if you write me back. With love, but getting impatient now, Doodle. Hugo, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Really? Oh, I know you. You're the nosiest man alive. You're dying to know what objects were thrown, and you don't deserve to know because you haven't asked to hear it. But I'm going to tell you anyway, since I love you. My husband threw the following objects at me, that I can remember. a spatula, my jewellery box, a small pot plant, a mop, a photo frame with a picture of a cat in it, and my favourite Jane Austen-themed mug. I threw the following objects at my husband. A book, yes, I've got history there, a vase from his mother, a wooden Christmas decoration, and his favourite bright red mug, obviously, after he smashed mine. He tended to miss. I didn't. This gave him further ammunition and also the ability to claim that he wasn't really aiming at me. Anyway, there was this colleague of mine, and we were friends, and there was always a spark between us, and, well, over time, I became very, very attracted to them, and I was feeling guilty about having these feelings, so I decided it was only fair to tell my husband. When I did, I made it utterly clear that I wasn't going to act on these feelings because why would I have gone and told him if I was going to act on them? I would have just gone and done it. But I didn't. It felt like a dirty little secret, and I released it into the world. Oh, well, I don't think I've ever seen anyone so enraged before or since. He behaved as if I'd just confessed to having weekly orgies in our marital bed, and he expressed his opinions on the matter so loudly that the neighbours called the police. Once the police had gone, I realised that this was the last straw. Maybe I was trying to create the last straw by telling him, but I didn't consciously think that. I've always been impulsive, and though you disagree because you're far too British for my liking, I think that my gut is very rarely wrong. I told my husband that I wanted a divorce, and he said no on the spot. He said that I was giving in to my emotions. I spent the next fortnight reiterating the situation and ignoring all of his attempts to pretend that nothing was wrong, and still he said, absolutely not. Like declining was a genuine option. So I moved back home while he was at work. And then I sent my father round to try to get it sorted, because I was certain that my husband would come to his senses at some point, and I thought my father would embarrass him into that state with greater alacrity. But he refused to let my father inside unless he agreed in advance to tell me that I was being completely frivolous. So that went well. And then I started looking into divorce law, and you won't believe what I found out. Contact me if you want to know the next twist, and God, it's a big one. Love, Doodle. Hugo, you are making me think you don't love me very much at all, which is quite devastating, as you can imagine. Maybe this is the letter that you will deem worthy of a response. So, I started looking into divorce law, and that was when I discovered we would have to be separated for 5 years if he wouldn't agree. 5 years! I can still remember how my father, who never swears, just exclaimed, "Oh, fucking hell," when I told him the news. I didn't consider researching what I was getting myself into before my wedding for a second. I was signing a legal document. It was passed off as a, "Oh, just sign your name here, dear, to show that you love him." And before you knew it, you were chained to that person for a whole 5 years longer than you wanted to be. So I sent my poor father round again to convey the news to my husband, and this time he was actually invited in. Because my husband was positively delighted. He started talking about having 5 years to win me back, and how he just needed a few changes, which I'd understand better if I'd ever had to work on anything in my life. And then he went down on his knees and begged my father to aid him in his quest. At this point, father didn't want to fail me, but he was out of there. Apparently, he managed to yell over his shoulder, "She's never going to change her mind," as he sprinted for the car. Then the calls started. At first, we just hung up when we heard his voice, but he'd keep calling. So we learnt to leave the phone off the hook for an hour afterwards. And the letters. Oh, so many letters. I put each one unopened in a carrier bag in the cupboard under the stairs, and every so often I'd burn them in a big bonfire in the garden. I found that quite expressive. I was terrified that he'd come round. So after a few weeks of the above, my father paid him another visit with some friends. My father was so great. And it worked. He didn't come round, or try and accost me outside of work, or do any of the things that I'd been lying awake imagining. But the situation was still untenable, so I found my own place. My father called him to suggest the pointlessness of any further calls or letters, and my husband was quite enraged, apparently, that he wouldn't even know where his wife was living. The calls stopped, but the letters kept coming, addressed to father now, with requests to forward the enclosed envelope on to me. Hugo, I'm getting a little desperate. Hugo, this is the final fucking letter and then I'm done. The story stops in mid-air and our relationship stops with it. Understood? You do understand, don't you? That it's really hard for me to revisit this. That I don't talk to anyone about him. That I'm going to bed feeling sick, filled to the brim with the raging emotions from decades ago, just because I owe you an explanation, and you ignore it. So, last chance. For that whole 5 years, there was the dread of the time when I'd have to communicate with him again, because my husband was terrified of being a divorcee, and I knew that when I told him I wanted one. But anyway, during those years, I got a promotion, made 2 friends, lost one of those friends, published my first book, bought a picture of this limitless-looking tundra for my bedroom, started going to aerobics, quit, took up tap dance, quit, got into not exercising, got into not cleaning my flat, got into really fancy coffee, published my second book, and I also screwed a literal trail of men. I want to tell you it was fantastic, but what I actually wanted was an emotional connection with someone, and that just didn't seem possible while I was still married to him. The few times I tried to go on dates, I'd get panicky, and I could never get the timing right for telling them that I was technically married. So, eventually I gave up, and only had casual sex, which was supposed to be a fuck you to my husband, but actually it just asserted that my life was still not my own. And that changed me. I used to need people. Really need them. And now, as you know, I don't. I don't need you, Hugo. But I love you. I want you. And that's the way it should be. I'll tell you about what happened when the 5 years were finally up, but only if you deign to get in touch. Dear Hugo, oh, you wrote back. You wrote back. Oh, I was honestly starting to wonder if you would. What was it about that letter that finally made you write to me? Oh, anyway, you stuck to our bargain, so here's the rest of the story. 2 months before 5 years was up, I wrote to my husband at an address that my father had verified in person and told him that I was filing for a divorce. And since we didn't have much money, I proposed not involving any lawyers. And in his letter back, to my surprise, he apologized and said that he'd acted poorly. He said that he still thought we could have worked on our relationship, but he'd accept my decision, and not just because he had to this time, but was there any chance that I'd maybe meet with him and consider reconsidering? And, of course, I immediately said no. It didn't mean anything to me, him apologizing now. He went quiet for a few days, and then he wrote pretending that he'd never suggested that we stayed married, proposing that we split everything 50-50. I agreed, even though he'd admitted that he had no savings and therefore was basically just stealing half of my savings, that he had absolutely no right to take after the way that he'd behaved, but I wanted to be rid of him. Around 10 years ago, I told a close friend about my husband's sponging in our divorce, and do you know what she said to me? She said I knew when I signed the marriage certificate that I was agreeing to split everything with him, and if I didn't, then I didn't do basic research and only had myself to blame. If you don't want to give your spouse free money, get a prenup or don't marry them, she said with this smug smile. I just walked out, never spoke to her again. 6 months later, I received the decree absolute, and I was finally unmarried, finally free. It was amazing to be white clean. I would have loved to be a spinster. I think it would have been absolute heaven. I sent him a note. You're a gold-digging bastard, and I hope you never find true love. And then I got on with my life with the new me. Though that curse was ironic, because for years I was the one who didn't fall in love and honestly wondered if marriage had taken it away, if he'd snuffed it out. But then I met you. Can we meet? I think that we have a great deal to talk about after you've read this, but Hugo, I'm clearly never going to marry you, and I live in hope that you will not construe this as a rejection. I ask instead, will you spend the rest of your life with me? Legal strings only cause pain, as you've seen, but emotional ties mean far more than that. I want you, Hugo, and surely you can see where I'm coming from after reading my letters. Arrange a date, and don't wait too long, my love. With relief and joy, Doodle.
This was an Evcol Entertainment Clockwork Digital Studios original production, a part of the On Another Wavelength audio anthology series, featuring the voice talent of Michelle Campbell-Jones, written by Emma Dawson, directed and produced by Simon James Collier, series created and co-produced by Adam Dechanel, soundscape design by Charlie Braham.